Connect to Congress, where we ask members of our state's delegations the questions you have right now. Joining me now is Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland. She represents Washington's 10th district, which covers Pierce and Thurston counties. First of all, so let's get right to the situation in Ukraine. Condemnation worldwide here for Russia invading its sovereign neighbor. What can D.C. do here to help the people of Ukraine, and will our military take a bigger role in the coming days?
Well, thank you for that question. We know that Ukraine and Ukrainian people are on our minds, and we are thinking of them. We are praying for them. And I think it's important for us around the world, and especially here in the U.S., to show our support. You know that Tacoma actually has a sister city, Brovary, which is right outside of Kyiv. And so, as we look at what we can do, we have to provide support for them. The U.S. military is providing logistical support. We'll probably provide medical support and really, just continue to support President Biden with the sanctions that are economic that will have a huge impact on their economy. Their stock market yesterday went down 46%. And so we must stay vigilant, and we must hold Vladimir Putin responsible for this irresponsible, unnecessary, violent act of attacking a sovereign nation.
A major headline: President Biden set to nominate U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court. What are your thoughts on his pick?
Well, I'm very excited because he is making good on a campaign promise that he made. And I want to make sure we're clear about something. Anytime a Supreme Court nominee is going to be, presented, we want to make sure that it is the most qualified candidate. And it is entirely possible to be African-American and the most qualified. We have a strong bench of candidates, and he made a promise to appoint an African-American woman to the bench. It's about time, because it's long overdue, and her qualifications are impeccable, and we're excited to see her go through the nomination process.
Inflation also running rampant right now. It was up 7.5% month over month in January. Wholesale prices up even more. Obviously, the Fed plays a key role here, raising interest rates to cool things off. But what can Congress do here to help people who are struggling right now just to pay for things like food and gas? And tell us about what your coalition would do to address inflation.
Yeah, so, we have a really hot economy right now. The unemployment is down, wages are up, and there's just high demand for so many goods and services. And with that, it means prices will go up. And so I'm part of the New Democrat Coalition Inflation Working Group, and we're just going to take a look at solutions to try and address this issue. We know that families right now are struggling. We're coming out of a pandemic, and the last thing we want to do is add more financial burden to them. So being very thoughtful and looking at everything from supply chain to interest rates to, having conversations with some folks who are in the position to sell goods and services, and just doing what we can to provide relief and ease the challenges that families are facing across the country. And by the way, inflation is a global phenomenon. It's happening around the world.
Today, the CDC is expected to change mask guidelines. Our state expected to lift the indoor mask mandate March 21st. Is it moving too soon?
It's hard to say. I know that, after 2.5 years, people are just weary and exhausted. And I think the attitude for some folks is, vaccinations have been readily available. The adults who want to get them will get vaccinated. Sadly, the people who still end up in the hospital from COVID, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, are the unvaccinated. And that is having a stress on our healthcare system. So I think the conversation is going to be, what are you doing individually to keep yourself safe and your family safe? I will continue to wear masks as needed when I go indoors, and probably as I fly. But I think that, people are ready to try and get on with their lives. I think the question is going to become, are we going to be smart and thoughtful and use cautious behavior? A mandate being gone doesn't mean that the pandemic is gone or that COVID has disappeared. Again, people who are not vaccinated are most likely to end up in the intensive care unit and die, sadly. And they are the ones who are really clogging up the hospital system. And we cannot forget the impact this is having on the healthcare system, our healthcare workers, and people who need access to hospitals for chronic disease or emergencies.
Restaurants also still struggling from the pandemic. How would the Restaurant Revitalization Fund help them?
Yeah, so I recently led a letter with the Washington State congressional delegation to leadership in both the House and the Senate to ask them to replenish the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. During the American Rescue Plan, there was a tranche of money, about $28 million that went out, $28 billion that went out. And when that money went out, it only met half the need of the restaurants. And so we know that about 46% of the restaurants got access to it, but so many more did not. And, lifting a mask mandate and saying that it's okay to dine out again isn't going to change the fact that restaurants have been struggling for over 18 months now. And so we can't just suddenly lift a mask mandate and say, go back to business. The average restaurant will have debt of around $160,000. And that means that we must replenish this fund, provide more help and relief for restaurants, and really recognizing that they are employers. They are often neighborhood anchors and a very important part of our economy.
Let's get to the bipartisan infrastructure bill. We're really getting a sense now for where that money will go in Western Washington. How about in the 10th district?
You know, in the 10th district, it is very diverse in every sense of the word. So I've had conversations with mayors and government officials talking about how that money could be used. And it will include everything from dealing with stormwater systems to repairing roads. There are local bridges that are in desperate need of repair. You know, communities are very excited about expanding broadband, especially in rural communities. And then, of course, you know, just doing what we can to make sure that we are making huge investments in mass transit. And so cities and, you know, communities across the entire 10th district will see that infrastructure money invested in many ways. And our job right now, on top of all the things that are happening across the country, is to make sure that that money gets deployed, that people are going to work in high-wage union jobs, and that we're demonstrating that when we invest in our communities, it's an investment in people, in commerce, and the opportunity to live a good life and have equitable access to jobs that pay well.
You're also leading a new push to support historically Black colleges and universities. What will that push entail?
Well, so, you know, I am a proud graduate of the University of Washington, where I got my undergraduate degree, but I'm also a graduate of Clark Atlanta University, which is a historically Black college and university, where I got my MBA. And what we're seeing right now are a couple of trends. Enrollment in historically Black colleges and universities is trending upward, but these institutions have historically not been funded the way they could be. So we're making sure that we are adequately funding them. We're trying to provide some flexibility with some of the relief funds that allows them to make capital investments, and just doing what we can to make sure that they can sustain themselves. Historically Black colleges and universities were created in a time when African Americans didn't have access to what I call traditional universities, but they have thrived recently. They're doing well. There's a lot of interest in them, and we want to make sure that this bipartisan effort supports these important institutions that provide economic opportunity and educational access for so many students.
You have also just clocked your first year in Congress, and what a year it has been. Do you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, my reflection is this. You know, I can't believe that it has already been a year, and I can't believe it's only been a year, if that makes sense. It has been incredibly eventful since the day I was sworn in. You know, we survived a failed coup attempt to overturn an election. There was an impeachment process. President Biden and Vice President Harris got sworn in. And to be honest with you, we've delivered a lot for the American people. The economy is strong. Wages are up. People are going back to work. We are investing in infrastructure, and we're going to continue to do the work to defend voting rights, to make sure that we have free and fair elections. And at the end of the day, you know, as a proud Democrat, we are fighting every day for a nation that is safe, that is just, and that is secure. And when people feel that way and have those things, that's when this country can thrive. So I look forward to continuing the work for the 10th Congressional District of Washington State, home of Joint Base Lewis McChord, the South Sound, and really just doing what we can to add more housing, to provide better jobs, to really strengthen our economic development, invest in transit, and again, doing what we can to address climate change to make sure that people can live in a society that is safe, just, and secure.
Yeah, you just touched on some of that there. Anything else you'd like the people who live and work in the 10th district to know?
You know, I think just a general message, you know, coming out of this pandemic right now, you know, people have been at home for a long time, you know, students are struggling in school, and we just all need some kindness and grace with each other. And so I say to folks, you know, take a breath, think about being kind and gracious to someone. And I just think that we just need a lot more of that right now. And the example I use is when I fly back and forth from Washington, D.C., flight attendants have historically given you a lecture about putting on your oxygen mask. Here's how we stay safe. And sadly, there's a preamble now about wearing your mask and knowing how to act, polite, being gracious, not starting fights. And so I want to make sure that we just think about our humanity, our shared humanity, regardless of our political affiliation, and think about being kind and gracious to each other, because we need so much of that, especially right now.
A little kindness goes a long way. Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland from Washington's 10th District, thank you so much for joining us for Connect to Congress.